Okay, hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay. Okay. So, hope you're all doing good, and we are about to move forward in learning the Spring JDBC library. That's something very important in terms of connecting with the backend. So, as I've already briefed you people in the last class, that this JDBC is an essential part. You might be aware of different database connectivity platforms like ORM, Object Relational Mapping, using JPA, Java Persistence API, or something like that. But still, it's good to have a knowledge on JDBC, and we are going to dwell more in detail about the JDBC implementation here in this course. And once that is done, then we will be stepping into the web application setup using Spring. But none of these are going to be tied up with Spring Boot. Please make a note of it. We are not going to use any of the Spring Boot features. It's completely, absolutely switched off. Spring Boot is switched off. The reason is because this is the base and this is the core, and this is how we need to learn a Spring framework from the scratch. Okay. So considering that as a theme, only this course have been launched. So keep in mind that Spring Boot is not a part of this course, but I am in plan to come up with a Spring Boot special course exclusively. And there, if you are willing to join that course, then probably you will have more understanding about how we can quickly get adopted with the Spring Boot, since we already learned all the fundamentals and the base and the scratch work from the Spring framework. You can quickly compare them. How difficult it is to work with the Spring framework from the scratch rather than working on top of a Spring Boot. How the life of a developers will be made easy, that you can experience once you sit on top of the Spring Boot. Anyways, but still, Spring Boot also has a lot of intrinsic features in it, and those features have to be learned step by step. So Spring Boot means it's not just going and creating a Spring Boot project, I'm done with it, all the dependencies are managed by itself. That's not what the Spring Boot is. Spring Boot has its own features, set of features, and that we have to learn more in detail and depth. And that will lead you to the learning of more enterprise graded application development like microservices, Spring Cloud, and more features are there on top of the Spring Boot. So Spring Boot itself is a special course. Uh, Probably that I might be coming up in the near future once this course gets over. Okay. So before moving on to that, I guess you are already set up with the STS in your missions, and you're doing a practice. I advise you, please do a practice. Otherwise, getting used to the Spring framework will be a little cumbersome. It's not that easy of what we think. So please do practice. N number of practice is required. Enormous practice is required in order to get used with the Spring framework. Repeated practice also. At times, if you give a break, like for example 6 months or 1 year, you don't touch the Spring framework, then again we'll be back to the pavilion. Like we will be lost with all the knowledge that we have gained. But we can sync them once we go through that, right? So I advise you to keep in touch with it. Do some practice constantly, and also ensure that you do a lot of researching on top of this existing framework. Okay. Uh, so I guess I've given a lot of gyan, so it's time to move forward. I'm going to create a new application for understanding the Spring JDBC, and it's going to be from the scratch. So stay tuned for it. It's going to be quite interesting. Stay attentive, since it's going to be involved with more of a real-time backend connectivity. So every concepts are something very new to you, if in case you are very new to the Spring JDBC. Now, the first thing that we have to understand is what is a prerequisite. What is the prerequisite for Spring JDBC? The prerequisite is JDBC itself. Okay, so you should be aware of JDBC, then only you can follow up what's going to happen in the Spring JDBC. What if in case I'm not aware of JDBC? It's going to be like learning Spring JDBC as a new, and you'll be adopted only to this. But I believe you people are in touch with Java technology, so somewhere down the lane, probably not in the near, I mean in the near past, or probably you might have learned a long back, but the JDBC term should be there running in your mind when I'm teaching the Spring JDBC. That's very much important. So as I already told you, the essential part here is we should be aware of the JDBC part. So what is this JDBC is? Java database connectivity, correct? So you might be aware of this Java database connectivity. And typically there are multiple drivers. JDBC drivers are involved, and we'll be using the type 4 driver. Type 4 driver. Type 1 is already obsolete and it's not in use anymore. So anyways, we are not going to discuss about the JDBC, right? I'm just trying to recall the basic essence of JDBC. So type 4 driver is what we are going to use. It's a network driver, and it's more of a vendor specific driver. Okay, it's called as a thin driver. Okay, thin driver is which we are going to use for Spring JDBC also. So JDBC is a tool to connect your application with a backend, right? You have a database, you have an application which is developed using Java, and what is the intermediate connectivity layer is nothing but your JDBC application. JDBC is a set of code, a Java-based code which you will be writing in order to communicate with the backend, because backend language is SQL and front-end application language is Java, and they don't go hand in hand. You cannot handshake directly. Java can't handshake to SQL directly. Neither SQL can handshake with Java directly. And that's why we have an intermediator who's called as a JDBC, Java Database Connectivity Tool, or a library, which fits in with the help of this type 4 driver, which is exclusively written on the specific vendor. What I mean here is, if I say Oracle driver, type 4 driver, Java driver is there. If you go for MySQL, you have MySQL driver is there. And those drivers will help us to drive the communication between the respective database and with the application. This is the nutshell, but how the Spring JDBC is going to work with. That's which we are going to learn throughout the course. So Spring JDBC is another library in the framework of Spring. So Spring framework has its library called Spring JDBC, like how we started with Spring Core, right? The same way now the second library that we are going to see is Spring JDBC library. The Spring JDBC library is a part of Spring framework. Okay, it's a part of Spring framework, and this is going to have all the base features inherited from Spring Core. So even the Spring JDBC will be managed by the IOC container. Any library you go for henceforth relevant to the Spring, all the libraries will be based on top of Spring Core. Even if you go for Spring JDBC, you need Spring Core there. You're getting it? Even if you go for Spring MVC, you need Spring Core, because IOC plays the major role. Dependency management is there across your application, right? So any Spring libraries you go for, Spring framework libraries you go for, Spring framework is nothing but collection of libraries, okay? Collection of multiple libraries. And in that, one of the library that we are talking about right now is Spring JDBC, which requires your Spring Core as a base. So ensure that this is not something away from Spring framework that we are going to learn. It's the same of what we learned in the Spring Core is what is extended here as well. But Spring JDBC's purpose is to just connect with the backend, helping us to ease up our life, developers' life, and compared to the traditional JDBC. You should know the difference basically, right? Why we should go for Spring JDBC? What's the big deal? Spring JDBC follows a design pattern. Okay, Spring JDBC follows a design pattern called template pattern. Okay, in Java we have something called template pattern. It follows that template pattern. When you use the template pattern, the lines of code, that we create is going to be minimized. You're going to minimize the number of lines of code that you're going to invest in order to communicate with the backend with the help of template patterns. Because the Spring JDBC has an internal core class called JDBC template. This everything surrounds with this JDBC template. Okay, every talk with the database will be surrounded with the help of JDBC template. So as the name suggests, as the name is suggesting, the template, right? The template denotes that your JDBC template is following a certain design pattern principle called template design pattern or template pattern. These template patterns are always useful for reducing your lines of code because it will focus majorly on the major logic that is need to be involved. Rest can be assured that it will take care of it internally. Okay. So it will also take care, the JDBC template also take care of the exception mechanisms. Okay. Exception mechanisms. Technically speaking, there is a special exception mechanisms that's been followed here called as data access exception. Okay, just make a note of it. We'll discuss this anyways. Data access exception. Everything resolved around this exception type called data access exception. So what not, you have everything that you want to rely on for communicating with the database is there handled inbuilt in the JDBC template itself. That is the idea of using JDBC template. Is that clear? We have a lot of things to be discussed, but the overview is yes, Spring JDBC follows the JDBC internally. Spring JDBC is actually following the implementation via the Spring JDBC. I'm sorry, the JDBC part. JDBC is like the core, right? Spring JDBC follows the same implementations, but additionally it follows the design pattern called template design pattern. So you can throw these answers, technical answers, to typically shut down the interviewer's voice. Okay, so even many interviewers might not knew that it is following a template design pattern. Sometimes I'm just saying because we don't know who's actually evaluating, right? But if you talk more of technical terms and technical jargons, that would automatically shut down the interviewer's voice. So please throw these limelighted terms like template design pattern. Spring JDBC follows the template design pattern with the help of JDBC template. JDBC template, the template refers to the template design pattern. Okay. So if you want to rely more on how a template design pattern works on, probably you can just go and have a small research on it, right? Okay. So that's how it is, and I guess we'll quickly get into the demo. I don't want to spend much of in the theory. As we go along with the demo, you'll learn a lot of theoretical definitions as and when required. Uh, Before I mean, as I keep doing the creation of the project, if you have any queries, please do let me know. And meanwhile, I have my MySQL up and running. So literally, I'm already having some set of queries here. Uh, so let's look at dropping the schema once. So this is MySQL developer workbench. Okay. So this is how it would look like. And I guess I've already shown this in the last week. No, I think last week, right? Yeah. So here you have the MySQL workbench and you can connect to it. Uh, and once the IDE of the MySQL is loaded, you can go ahead and create a schema, and then you can create your tables. You can access the tables and do whatever you wanted. The table views are reflected here. So most of you might have been worked with MySQL, nothing new in it. Since I'm not connected with the Oracle because I need to set up the Oracle as a virtual machine. Since I'm running on top of the Mac operating system, Mac doesn't support direct installation of the Oracle instance, Oracle database instance. So let's go ahead and quickly create a new project. It's going to be again a Maven project. Again and again, I'm repeating, I'm not following Spring Starter project. The Spring Starter project would lead us to develop a Spring Boot project, which is quite easier for us to follow. Okay, so technically that is not required, right? So you can right click new and go ahead and create a Maven project right now. And let's call it as, okay, Maven archetype quick start is what which I'm using right now here. Com dot, let's say, banking application. Okay. So as usual, we go for removing the artifact ID from the package because I want the package to be com.ba and ensure that your artifact ID is representing the application name, right? But it says already exists because I already have one banking application boot, a Spring Boot application you can see here, right? So let's go for the name of the bank. That sounds great. And let's hit finish. Okay. Yeah. So I guess a Maven project is created. What is the very first step that we have to do? I guess you can see the name of the application here, right? So I'm just zooming the application name. This is the project name, and straight away we just go and see the the Java library that it is reflecting is 1.5. So what is our first initiative is to just go ahead and change this 1.5 to 14, the one which I have in my mission. So let's go right click from the project level, go to the properties and quickly change them to Java build path, edit and choose 14 and finish, apply. And looking at the compiler level also, there should be one check have to happen. So you can just change the compiler level to 14 as well. Apply and close. That's it. We are done with it. So you can see that Java SC 14 is reflecting. The next step is we need to add the dependencies. So what are the dependencies required? What dependencies are we in need of it? As I told you, we need Spring Core, right? So we need to bring the Spring Core library. Spring Core. And for Spring Core, you can just use Spring Context, right? When you go for Spring Context, you get all what you need for Spring Core application development. The next one is Spring JDBC. We need the Spring JDBC, as I've given the briefing about it. This library, the dependency need to be loaded with the help of this pym.xml. You're getting it? Okay. So let's go straight into the pym.xml. And we don't have any dependencies. You go to the dependencies tab out here rather than, we don't need to work on the pym.xml templates anymore because we already have the lower version of IDE, which is helping us to look out from the local repository. As you type, it will fetch the information from the local repository. So what is needed? We need Spring hyphen context, and we get the Spring hyphen context. That's step number 1. So we have 5.3.7. The next one is Spring hyphen JDBC. Wow. So we have that Spring hyphen JDBC as well. So you can just click OK. And we are done with it. We are added with the Spring hyphen JDBC as well. What else is required? What else we need for our application to communicate with the database? We have Spring Context. It's a Spring application, Spring Core application, a standalone application. We have Spring JDBC in place. What else is needed? We need to communicate with the database. Which database am I going to communicate with? MySQL. So what is essentially required right now is MySQL driver is required, correct? So we need to include that dependencies as well out here. So go ahead and search for MySQL connector, and that pops up. You can see a MySQL connector -java pops up. This is the driver library that's required in order to communicate with the database. So just hit OK and we are done with it. So I'll just give you a briefing again. The first one is the core part, the context, which includes all the all the Spring Core part out here, right? Spring Core, and this one is exclusively for managing the JDBC part, and this one is helping us to communicate with the MySQL backend database, right? So it hits the table and do the CRUD related functionalities, create, read, update, and delete. And for that purpose of communication, exchanging the communications between the SQL environment and the Java application environment, we need this type 4 driver. This is a type 4 driver, which is written and owned by MySQL. Okay, and it is also written purely in Java. Okay, it's not a C code. Type 1 is C code. Okay, C language. But type 4 is purely a Java driver, and it is also network driver. So it is solely created by the vendor called MySQL itself. The same way Oracle has its Oracle driver, right? So that's how it is. Okay, just a second. Let me mute someone. Okay. Yeah. So that's how it is. And these are the libraries which we are in need of it essentially. Hope you are getting this point. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. We'll also do one level of research here on the hierarchy. If you look at the Spring JDBC in turn connects with Spring Beans and Core. Okay, you can see Spring Beans and Spring Core. That is the only two that it has an interdependencies. These are interdependencies, right? Transitive dependencies, but we need many more from the core part, like for example JCL, expression language, right? So how do we go and get that? Only with the help of context. If in case you want to use an aspect oriented approach, you need AOP. So that's the reason I went for using context, which is very essential. And then you drop in for the Spring JDBC, and that's it. So this is hierarchy. But you don't notice anything from the MySQL, correct? There's nothing like MySQL's hierarchy out here. So that's fine because that's a single dependency of jars. And what else we need? That's all. Okay. So
Sir, is it
any
added
question?
manually?
Come again, please.
I can see that MySQL connector jar file. So is that added manually or how come it added to the dependencies, sir?
This one?
Yeah, the last one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I added just now, right? If you go to add MySQL hyphen connector, so it'll pop up and hit OK. But this by default, it won't be available. OK, for the very first time, you need to get it from the global repo. So in that case, it's good to have this dependencies manually feeded inside this pom.xml file. You're getting it?
Yeah,
Here you
yes, sir.
can see the MySQL code is there, yeah, dependencies. How am I getting it? Because I've already worked around on this. So in my local repository, I already captured this driver jar. In your case, if you are not finding it out, you have to take this one. Okay.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Yeah. Okay. If you want the entire things, I'll give you. Not an issue. So we can just you have the dependencies, right? Dependencies, the root tag inside that you drop all these, and that's it. You're done with it. If the libraries are not there, it will go to the global repository and start downloading it. I've shared it on the chat window. Please grab it from there and paste it into the pom.xml file. That's it. Okay. And whenever you create henceforth a new project, you don't need to do that step again because already it got downloaded and kept in your local repo. That's what the understanding is. And when you search with MySQL-connector, automatically it will pop up from the suggestions list. And from the suggestions list, you can refer to the version that you want and you can pick them up. Okay. So let's go straight into the code. Right now I have a default package which we have created at the time of creating the project. That's none other than com.ba. BA refers to the banking application, and the project name is American Express. But one thing is missing out. Can you notice what is missing out in this project hierarchy or project structure? Can anyone recognize what is that missing out from this project?
Resource folder.
Correct. So we are missing out with the resource folder. So as I said already, you can just go ahead and create it manually. Go to the source folders and check out for the availability of the source and the main, and hit OK, and / point out the folder name as the resources and hit finish. Why I'm worried about the resources? Because I'm going to place the configuration file that's required for database relevant configuration codes. So I need the resources folder in place. Okay. Now, firstly, let's go and look at the app. So this is going to be seemed as the main application, which carries a main method out here. Let's keep this aside for a while. The first thing that I'm going to do is right click new and go ahead and create a package called configuration. And Java based configuration is what we are going to do, right? So I'm going to use something called American Express app config. Okay, so this is one file, and I'm also going to use another file called dbconfig. So totally, I'm going to have two Java configuration file. I guess during the connect session we were talking about that, right? How do we import the multiple configuration files and sync them into one? So literally, you can just go ahead and use at configuration firstly. Okay, and in the db config, you can again mark them as at configuration, right? The next step that we are going to do here is we are going to use component scanning. I guess you're aware of what is component scanning by now. It's trying to scan for all the components that we are going to create henceforth. So we don't need to manually define them or define them as a bean. It will automatically go and scan through. What will be the scanning package that we have to refer here? So base package equals it's going to be com.ba is the root package, right? So from BA, whatever the child packages are there, all the packages will be scanned thoroughly in order to identify the availability of the components and start intimating the IOC container to create the instance for respective components. That's what is going to happen. Now, if I wanted to use the other Java class, right, that we have created, the configuration class, so we can go ahead and use them as well. Value equals we can say dbconfig dot class, right? So I'm just importing the dbconfig dot class into this American Express app config. And I'm going to why I'm segregating, because I don't want to I don't want to make the code more ugly, right? Too many configurations in a single configuration file seem to be more cluttered. Okay, so you have to declutter them. So in order to declutter, it's better to have the separate configuration files for the separate operations. So let's say, for example, dbconfig, it's for db configuration. If you have something for message queuing, you want to exchange messages, send and receive messages, and you have a MQ server deployed. and you need to do a message queuing MQ server configuration, then you have a messaging config.java and import them into the single configuration file by using @import. So technically speaking, it is only for decluttering your code rather than having a single file configuration base code base. You can just segregate them into multiple configuration Java files and assemble them into a single file by using this @import notation and refer the class that you wanted. Okay, I guess this is done. The next setup that we want is, this is more of a database related application, right? So we need to go ahead and create another package. Let's call that as a model right now and give the model com.pa. Give the model package as with a class name called customer. Okay, so I have customer. Now this is typically a plain old Java object class, and this is not a Spring Bean, it's a Java Bean. Why I'm saying it's a Java Bean? Because it's going to be managed manually by the developer. This is not going to be taken care by the IOC container, so that we are going to recognize this class as a Java Bean class. Hope you're getting it, right? So it's a Java Bean class and no annotations required. I'm not going to define with any annotations as of now, but I'm going to provide with certain fields. So private int customer ID, private string customer name, and private string customer address, right? So this is what I have as the three major fields. You can have as many number you wanted based on the use cases. So let's go ahead and just put a getters and setters for it. Firstly, I'm just going to create a constructor, no argumented constructor, which is of customer type. Another one is parameterized constructor. So to generate a parameterized constructor, we have this option called generate constructor using fields. And for all the fields, a constructor will get created. And I don't want this to be invoked. Okay, let it be. So we have the parameterized constructor. This will help us in many ways. Okay, when we want to cook up the value, you can just use a constructor to define all the customer ID, customer name, and address in the constructor argument itself. So that's the reason that I go for parameterized constructor. The next thing that I wanted is to define a getters and setters for this. This is how a bean class would look like. Okay, a Java bean class, a model class, would contain a set of fields, constructors, and getters and setters. So let's go ahead and quickly generate a getters and setters. Select them all and generate. So these are code generation work. I'm not investing much of a time to manually create them. Okay, so please ensure that you follow the same. If you are a first time learner, then literally you have to practice them as a handwork rather than auto generating the code. But if you are a proficient guys, then probably you can just use them to generate those codes as and when required to eliminate the time that's going to be consumed for writing those codes. So what else we need? I guess sometimes I want to print out the object and see what's the value that object carries. So I have three fields, right? So let's go ahead and create a toString method. I'm going to generate a toString method. Boom, that's all. My model class is done. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. The reason I use toString is because whenever you print a raw object, right, the object reference alone will get printed on the console. When I say sysout obj1 of the customer object, it prints the reference of the object. Technically speaking, it says customer at some F896893, some number will be there, a junk number kind of a representation. But I don't want that. I want what that object contains in it. right? So internally, the toString method will be invoked in order to print that particular object. And as you are well aware, the toString method comes from the topmost class called the object class. I guess there is no much of a complexity in understanding this model. If you still have any questions, please do raise it instantly before we go to the next level. Any questions? I'm there to help you out. I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. Seems to be one absent. Okay. Yeah. Any questions, guys? Okay. So your silent is accepted to be no questions. So model is there. What else we need? We need service. So I'm going to create another package called service. The usual one that we do, right? And also I'm going to have one more package called DAO, Data Access Object Package. We'll come to that package a bit later. So right now we have service. Going into the service, let's create a class called customer service, right? And ideally, since it's a service representation, I want this to be demarcated with @service, and so it is going to be considered as a Spring Bean. But if you look at the model is not a Spring Bean, it's a Java Bean, because it's not going to be managed by the IOC container. But looking at the customer service class, it is a Spring Bean class because it's going to be managed by the IOC container. Does it make sense? I guess so. Okay, so we have this customer service in place. We are done. What else we need? We need to cook up a particular method to invoke your DAO. So the flow goes like this. Okay, so DAO will just go ahead and create a DAO class as well. I'm going to call them as a class called customer DAO. Customer DAO, right? See the way how I'm naming the class names, variable names, package names. Those things matters a lot. Okay, so don't just throw some random class names. Okay, do follow the proper naming conventions. That's something very, very important. Okay, so we have customer DAO here, right? So inside this, I'll have some method to be cooked up for DAO. How it's going to work? We have a main root app class. App class is going to communicate with the service, and service class is going to communicate with DAO, and DAO is the one who's going to finally communicate with the backend. Are you getting this flow? That's why I've created all these structures. Is this essential to follow all these standards? Not necessary. You can just have com.ba package alone and dump all the classes into it, all relevant classes into the same package itself. No one is going to stop you, but this is the way how we actually create the project structure, right? Hopefully you would have already meddled with that if you're working on the Java related projects, but still it's my turn to highlight them, saying that a proper standards of implementation is very important. So main method will invoke the service, and service will invoke the DAO, and in the DAO you have the connectivity to the backend. So DAO will use the respective template. Which template? The JDBC template object, in order to communicate with the backend. The backend is MySQL in my case. And where do I provide all the MySQL property information, the database information, URL, username, password, the driver name, and so on? I'll be keeping it in the .properties file. .properties file. Okay. Inside this file, I'll place all the configurations and I will cook up the specific data source. I'll cook up the data source. So when I'm cooking up the data source, I need all the property informations to cook up the data source, and the data source will be binded to the template, and the template will be handed over to the DAO, and the DAO will make use of the template because the template knows the complete details about the backend, and you can inject all the CRUD related queries, create, read, update, and delete. That is how it is. So it's pretty simple, not too complicated. Okay, don't complicate things. Anyways, we are going to see on the first high level, probably tomorrow also we have the continuation of the JDBC. So at that time you will see more advanced part of the transaction handling, declarative transactions, programmatic transactions. That's going to be pretty awesome and interesting features as well to discuss with. So what do we need to do is even the customer DAO should be a part of the Spring Managed Bean. Spring Managed Bean class, right? So in that case, I mark them as at repository. When do you use repository? When there is a DAO comes into the picture. Is that mandatory to flag them as a repository? Not essentially. You can also call them as at service. You can call them as at component. Doesn't matter. But at component is the mandate annotation to be marked in order to manage the class as a Spring Bean class automatically by the IOC. So to be more precise, I'm just marking them as at repository. Okay, but technically speaking, at repository is also a component. It is also a component. Okay, I'm highlighting again and again. It is also a component. So what is essentially required? We need at component in place. It could be a component type like repository or a service or a controller or a REST controller or whatever it is, doesn't matter. So since we have already given the component scanning part here, right? In the configuration, I have given the component scanning part. So component scanning part will scan through this BA. So let me ask one question, okay? To be a little bit of interactive, since you people seems to be not having much of a question. So let me ask a question. So we have this com.ba, correct? Now I'm instructing the IOC, the Spring IOC, to go and scan the package. It will go and scan the package. Okay, it will go and scan all the packages. When it is scanning all the packages, right, will it scan the package to model as well? Will it scan the package of model?
No.
That is the first question. Will it scan the model package? No.
It is sibling. We have to give on that package name also, comma.
No, that is not the understanding, right? Last week what we
Because that
learned.
is Java Bean, Pojo class, simple Pojo class, not the Spring Bean, right?
No. Let's come back to that. See, first thing is first problem itself is there. People's understanding is different now. com.ba is the base package, correct? Root package. Under the root package only I have model. Why should I mention model? Why should I put comma here and put model? Base package is meaning is what? This is the root package. You go down to all the intrinsic packages, transitive packages, right? That is the meaning. Model is belonging to which package? Model is a child package of whom? PA. Correct? Is the understanding clear? Because someone said that we have to give specially the model. Not required, right? Model is a child package of BA. Please don't give comma com.ba.model. Not required. Com.ba is more than enough. Automatically it will go and scan configuration. It will go and scan DAO. It will go and scan service. But my question is, will it scan com.ba.model? Yes or no?
Sir. No.
Why?
In model class package, sir.
It doesn't contain at service or any other at component
Spring
reference.
managed properties.
Okay.
That is
Yeah, your understanding is correct. But my answer is yes, it will scan the package. It will scan the package. Okay. But it finds nothing out of that package to get managed by the IOC of any of the classes because the class is not demarcated with at component. But the question is, will it scan or not? Yes, of course. All the child packages will be scanned through. It will go into this package, but it finds nothing to be taken as a input from the package because this particular class is not a component class. What class is that? It's a normal Java bean, correct? So
Pojo class.
scanning happens, but the class will not be considered by the IOC for managing this bean because it is not a Spring Bean. It is a Java bean. The next question is, will it scan the service package? This component scan IOC will go and scan the service package. Yes, it will scan the service package, but will this class be considered for managing by the IOC? Yes.
Yes.
Will it go to the DAO? Yes, it will scan the
Yes.
DAO. Will it consider this customer DAO to be managed by the IOC? Yes. Because that is marked as what? At repository. What is service is marked as? At service. And they all fall under which base root annotation? At component. That is a meaning. But it does scan the model, but finds zero class to be managed by whom? By the IOC. Why zero class? There is a class out here, but that is class which is not a component class. Okay, so it will scan all the packages. Please make a note of it. All packages are child packages. So it looks like this com.ba. Under this we have what? Configuration. Under this we have DAO. Under this we have model. And under this we have service. So what is the root I've given here? com.ba. Please go and scan the base packages and their child packages is the meaning. But if I have com dot, let's say HR, okay. Now this will not be scanned. Why? Because I've given only com.ba and their child packages, but I haven't mentioned com.hr. Who is com.hr for this BA? I guess in the last week I explained about this.
Is that the sibling?
Correct, exactly. This is sibling. Right, this is your sibling package. Sibling means sibling for whom? HR is a sibling for whom? The BA. But who's the parent for BA and HR? Who's the parent for BA and HR? Com, correct. This parent has a child called BA and the same parent also has a child called HR. But BA and HR are siblings. But I'm instructing only the BA package and their child packages to be scanned, but not the sibling HR. If you want HR, now the answer what you gave is correct. We have to go and say comma com.hr. Is that understanding clear?
Yes.
Okay, fine, great. Now let's revisit the resources. In the resources, I'm just going to create one file, an empty file, naming it as application.properties. The properties files is a Java specific configuration file. Only Java environment can understand .properties. Okay, I'm just giving you some piece of information here. You know what properties files are meant for. Property files are meant for dropping all your configuration values. It will be in the representation of a key and value. Okay, Spring is a Java based framework, so it accepts .properties file. Java runtime environment can read only the .properties file. Okay, but when you go for Spring Boot, people, if you are working on Spring Boot, in Spring Boot you have something called YML file. Okay, it is called as a YAML file. YAML file is nothing but yet another markup language. Yet another markup language file cannot be understood by the Java environment. That is made to be understandable only by the Spring Boot environment. So you can't use YAML to be replaced by .properties file in a traditional Spring application. In a traditional Spring Java application, you can't use YAML. YAML have to be used only in Spring Boot. Either you can use .properties there or you can use YAML file. YAML is more convenient for configuring rather than properties, and YAML has more features when compared to .properties. But, and more interestingly, Spring Boot has features to not just a lot with dot properties representation. It uses YAML because different other environment or different other language can understand YAML, but other language won't accept properties file. Correct? So properties file is known only to the Java environment. Do please make a note of it. Anyways, we'll discuss about that YAML and once we get into the Spring Boot related courses. So right now it's not required, but I'm just giving you a small information on that. YAML is also a configuration file, similar like properties, but it has its own structure. Key value pair, but it will be nested. It will be in a nested structure, and reusabilities are more, and many features are there in the YAML. Yet another markup language. Okay, so now here in the resources directory, I'm trying to create the application.properties and hit finish. You can notice that automatically the Spring Leaf symbol icon appears. Can you see that? Right. So what does that mean is that is a Spring environment recognized property file, and moreover Java recognized property file. Okay, now here we are going to use some set of properties. So let's say a data source dot. Okay, I'm going to start with data source. Hope the font is visible to you all, right? So the first one is data source dot username of the data source dot username of the database. So what is the database username is root. I have. Then again data source dot password equals password 123. That is the password that I've given for my MySQL instance. And just a second. Yeah. Data source username, data source password, data source.
This is the root password, right, sir?
Exactly. This is the root password which I defined. Don't follow this. Your might be different. At the time of installation, I followed the rule of password 123. I'm not using at because this will impact in many ways. This is a special character, right? So in database, please don't use at symbols. Neither in any of the passwords like applications or anywhere in database system installations, don't follow that principle. Okay, so data source.url. Data source.url is going to be considered as JDBC colon MySQL. It's like the URL that we refer for some website, correct? HTTPS colon / google.com. The same way, the MySQL has its own URL, and the protocol that we have to follow here is JDBC colon MySQL. There we use what protocol for communication? For web applications to be accessed, HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocol. But here that's not the protocol that we can use. So JDBC colon MySQL, okay, colon / and / local host. Okay, local host is the representation of my local machine. If it's located somewhere away from my machine, let's say it's located somewhere in the cloud, in the AWS cloud I have, then you need to pick up the IP address of that, or literally the DNS name, in order to contact that particular system to hit the MySQL instance. So here everything is in the local machine, so I'm using local host as the address. Otherwise you have to mention the IP address replacing the local host. The next one is we have the port number, which is 3306. Okay, / followed with the schema name. So this is how the URL will be splitted. So how the URL looks like? The protocol, JDBC MySQL protocol, the IP address of the MySQL instance, and this is the port number of the MySQL. This is the default port number. Okay, all MySQL's installed instance will carry the default port of 3306. If in case you want to change them, okay, you can change it at the time of installation or later on, because there might be some port conflict might occur. So if you want to choose that, you can choose it differently. That's a different administrative task in the MySQL environment. So I'm not going in detail with that, but default port is 3306, and you have to offer the schema name / schema name. To that schema only you're going to communicate with, where you have collection of tables sitting out there. Okay. The next final thing that we have to do is set the driver. How do you set the driver name? Go to the Maven dependencies. Look at the MySQL connector, right? And down you'll be having something called com.mysql. If it's not visible, I'll just zoom it. Hope you can see the package name right now clearly, right? com.mysql.cj.jdbc. Drill down to that package, and there you will find one class called driver.class, right? So which is the package? com.mysql.cj.jdbc coming under the MySQL connector jar file. Go to the package and find whether there is a class called driver.class. And this is what which I'm going to refer here. Data source dot driver hyphen class name. Okay, what is the driver class name? com.mysql.cj.jdbc.driver. That's all. This is what which you have to refer here. You're getting it? Now, in Spring Boot, it's a different story. Okay, in Spring Boot, it's going to be a different story. It's like starting with spring.datasource.username, they will be following. But this can be avoided. You can directly say username, password, URL, driver class name, or you can say, let's say key one, right? Key 2, key 3, key 4, and their respective values. So what I try to conclude here is any name would suffice. Any name would suffice to carry the value of the configuration. You're getting it? Any name would suffice to carry this value. Not necessary that you have to follow this naming pattern. But I follow this because this is how traditionally we follow the naming pattern while we are configuring the data source information. So what is data source technically? The database connectivity informations will be fed in the data source. That is the meaning. Data source, database source information, correct? And that's what I'm giving. MySQL username, MySQL password, MySQL URL, and the driver that the MySQL is going to use, the application is going to use in order to communicate with the MySQL database. Any questions in this, please let me know. Any questions? Okay. So let's assume that there's no questions further. Now, let's go back to our configuration, DB configuration this time. And the
It
DB
is having order, sir.
No. You
No,
can
okay.
no need of order. Why we should maintain an order? No need of an order because it's only the key that you're going to pick there, right? So
Yes.
it is not automated.
Okay.
So you're going to refer this name there, key name, and it will pick the value and inject it. So even in Spring Boot, you can mention it in any order, doesn't matter. Okay, so in this DB configuration, I'm going to use at property source. That's something very important, right? We need to have the property source in place. So this property source is a place where we are going to mention the location where the source is. Application dot properties. I guess in the last class I briefed about it, right? To invoke the property file, you need to mention this application dot properties file, class path / application dot properties file. And here where we are going to start configuring the data source information. Okay, so before going to that, actually I need a data source information. So what I'm going to do is I need one more library which I forgot to mention, which I'll be including right now. Okay, I need the data source object to be created. So I need a library for that, which is offered by Apache. Yes, it's data source. Let me see if I have. It should be there. Okay. So I have something called Tomcat-JDBC. Why it's not listing? Tomcat-JDBC. Tomcat. Tomcat-JDBC. Okay. Let me capture this here. I'm using this Tomcat-JDBC library. I'm just dropping in for you people if you're practicing parallelly with me. Just plug in this dependency code once, let it download, and you keep it in the local repo. So I'll tell you why I need this Tomcat-JDBC shortly. So once this dependency is added upon, okay, Tomcat-JDBC, okay, please make a note of it. Going to the configuration file, the first thing that I'm in need of is I need to configure a bean IOC managed data source. Okay, it's going to be IOC managed data source, but it's not like a component or something. That class doesn't have that feature, right? Because it's coming from a separate library. It's a separate vendor, Apache, Tomcat, right? Doesn't belong to Spring. So we need to manually configure that class to be managed by the IOC, and there where we need the @bean manual configuration out here. So starting from @bean, okay, starting from @bean, you can just create a method called public data source. Okay, please make sure in the suggestion list you have to choose this. There might be multiple data source which you might be having. Okay, so please make sure that you use data source org.apache.tomcat.jdbc.pool, org.apache.tomcat.jdbc.pool. Okay, this is the data source that I wanted. So that's the reason that I went up to download that Tomcat JDBC, Tomcat-JDBC. This is coming from, okay, this package and the data source is coming from Tomcat JDBC. Okay, Tomcat JDBC. So that's the reason we added this. There might be different data source can be used. Okay, you have Hakira data sources there. I guess it's Hikari, and we have AWS, Amazon specific data sources they have launched recently. So there are multiple data sources are there. Okay, data source is mainly for pooling your instances and getting all the database informations and pooling all the connection objects. Okay, it can keep pooling all your connection objects, and it can release the object according to the necessity of the application. Anyways, so it's enough that we go with Tomcat data source coming from the Apache product. Get data source. Any name would suffice. Instead of saying get data source, we'll give a meaningful name like data source itself, right? So here inside this, we need to configure all the data source information. But the very first thing is you need to get the value from the property file, correct? From here, we need to gather the value. So how do you gather the value? To get the value from the property file, what is that we need to use? So let's say I create a string. Yeah. So string username, string password, string URL, and string, what else we need? Driver name, correct? Now, these variables should capture the value from this property, root, password 123, this URL, and the driver name. So to capture that, as I already briefed you in the last class, we are going to use one annotation to inject the property values in here called @value, and internally to it, I'm going to use an expression called spell expressions. Okay, spell expression syntax would look like this: spell Spring expression language. Spring expression language. Okay, so internally to this Spring expression language, keep capturing the key name. What is the key name? Data source dot username, and feed in here. Same thing that you got to do repeatedly in all your fields. Just a matter of injection. That's all. And going up to the properties, carry the password, URL, right? URL, and the last one is driver hyphen class name. That's it. So coming down, right, we need to make use of these fields to cook up the data source object. So to cook up the data source, I'm just saying data source equals new data source. You have setter methods out there. Set username. This is the username variable that I'm punching. Automatically ID picks up that, okay, based on the fields that you have created. So we don't need to do that explicitly. So data source dot set password. Data source dot set URL. And finally, data source dot set driver name, the class name, and you can return the object so that the IOC container can manage this object. It will create the object and it will manage it in its connection in its object pool. So what we are doing is manually configuring the data source and leaving it to the IOC container to manage the instance and wire them as necessity. Right? Is it clear? Seems to be a big process, right? But quite easy, actually. So from the scratch, we need to do it. Then only we can understand. I'm going to make you people a little more complicated tomorrow. Tomorrow it's going to be a transaction. So that's going to be pretty much complicated. But if you learn that from the scratch, the complexity of the transactions, you'll feel a lot of energy to learn more, actually, because that's how we need to learn Spring. It's not just like that, go to a Spring Boot and auto-complete all the configurations. So once you go to the Spring Boot, after you learn all these the base scratch part, you can quickly relate them and you can learn things more out from the features of Spring Boot. So you will have the option to differentiate how actually a Spring framework differs from Spring Boot. It is not entirely different, right? Spring Boot is adopting the Spring framework, but it is making the developer's life pretty easy to quickly create your application. So you can ask a question, do I need to create this kind of a data source in Spring Boot? Not necessary. Do I want to create all these variables and pick them? Not necessary. You just go ahead to the properties, define them along with prefixing with spring.datasource.username. That's all. Spring Boot will automatically do all these steps and create a data source and hand it over to you based on the library that you have in the pom.xml. That's the cleverness of Spring Boot. That's how clever the Spring Boot is. You will not learn any of these things out there. If a newbie, okay, if a newbie is coming in, and if he or she is entitled to develop an application, I mean, put up into a project where he or she wants to develop a Spring application, and they've already given a template of a Spring Boot project, they will start learning from there. And ideally, they will not get to know what actually means from the data source and how it has been manually configured and how we can bean them and then how we can inject them. Such knowledge they won't acquire. Okay, such knowledge is required. It depends on how you want to utilize your knowledge. Okay, but still, it's good to have this knowledge from the scratch. Okay, the next thing, what is that we need to do is we need to create the Spring JDBC template and wire the data source into this JDBC template. Okay, now we are getting into the template design pattern. So what is the next step? We have to go for again add bean. Okay, this is again an add bean. So here public JDBC template. See the package from where the JDBC template comes from. Let's have a quick view on that. Here. Org Spring Framework. It's not core, it's JDBC, correct? And inside JDBC, you have something called core library. And inside that, you have JDBC template. Remembering these packages is not essential. Ideally, it's not possible. Even I cannot remember these packages. But at least to have a view, okay, this JDBC template doesn't come from context or doesn't come from beans, it comes from JDBC. That level of thing you should know. You need not remember the sub packages. If someone asks that deep question, ideally we are humans, right? So we cannot have that kind of an intelligence to remember all the internal package names, but we can give a root package name. That is something very important. Yes, JDBC template belongs to a package called JDBC inside Spring Framework and org. This you should remember always. How the Spring Framework starts with org.Spring Framework. This is essential to be remembered. I asked this kind of a question. Okay, sometimes people will not be in a position to give the answer for this. They will just say com.Spring Framework. Okay, sometimes they will just say a Spring Framework. They will just start with Spring Framework. This is essential. It starts with org and Spring Framework and followed with the library package names. Okay, so now let's go down JDBC template and JDBC template. All right, so what we are going to do here, as I said, we are going to cook up the object of JDBC template. We are not actually cooking up the object. It's a definition. OK, cook up the definition for the JDBC template object creation, and that will be handled by the IOC container. Right. So just a second. Yeah. Now. OK. JDBC template. JDBC template equals new JDBC template. Right. So once you see that, once you have created this JDBC template, you can notice that there is something called constructor level parameter asking for data source. And also there is something called lazy init, whether you want to lazily initialize the data source object or whatever it is, you have that. But here where I'm going to wire. So what type of a wiring is this? If I'm going to call this data source method out there, what type of a wiring?
Auto wiring?
No, this is not auto wiring. I'm doing a manual wiring. Manual wiring. But what type of a manual wiring is this?
Reference.
Constructor
Constructor
based
level.
wiring. Correct? Am I using setter or constructor here to wire this object?
Constructor.
I'm using constructor, right? So constructor based wiring, or it is called as a constructor based injection. Wiring injection, more or less similar. Okay, so don't get confused. It's all of a more technical jargons that we keep using day on day. So whether it's an injection or a wiring, it all means more of similar. So manual wiring. Wiring means manual. Okay. Automatically also you can wire. Both are representing what? Injection service. Manual injection or auto wiring injection. Injection in sense manual wiring injection. That is what it means. Okay. So finally, return the object. JDBC template. That's all. You're getting it. So what is the learning here is? The learning that we get here is we have a JDBC template. Okay. The object, we are instructing the IOC to manage this object. Okay. Anyways, IOC will take care. But while instructing the IOC to manage the object of the JDBC, at the time of creating the instance of the JDBC template, the IOC have to inject this data source object. Inject the data source object is what the definition says. So automatically IOC will inject it. And so the JDBC template will get to know all the details of this database information. This JDBC template will be used as a tool to communicate with the database, MySQL database. This JDBC template will be used to write all your SQL queries, okay, to perform your CRUD related operation. What is CRUD is? Create, read, update, and delete, right? So you can perform this CRUD related operations with the help of the JDBC template. This is your heart of Spring JDBC. Heart of Spring JDBC is what? JDBC template. Okay. So far what I'm trying to derive from this set of configuration is I need this template object, and that's been managed by the IOC. And to create a JDBC template, the important thing that is required is your data source. And we have already configured all the data source informations relevantly required, and it's been injected out here. That's all. So step number 1, create the data source object. Step number 2, create the JDBC template object. As simple as that. So if you have any questions on this, please do let me know. It's more of transparent explanation. I don't think there is any hidden informations out here, more of a transparent, but following what we have learned so far in the last couple of weeks, correct? That's what we are continuing here. That's why I said the strong is the fundamental need to be strong in place. Okay. Now you can sync up with everything. Every feature that we have learned is what is used here, correct? So try to stitch them together while you're working with more of such kind of a project. You try to bring up all your essential learnings and try to use them then and there. Okay, any question? No questions. Okay. Yes.
Sir, why we are using the Tomcat JDBC?
That's providing me the data source platform, right? As I said, there are many data source platforms we have. Third-party data source platforms are there like Hikari. Okay, you can use either one. But we are well known for this Tomcat data source management, right? Data source. So if you go for WebLogic, even WebLogic has a data source. So it's up to you which one. I want this class to be effectively used, so I'm using this library. That's all.
Main purpose is to use the data source platform, right, sir?
Yeah, this is providing me the data source platform. The
Okay.
Tomcat JDBC provides me the data source platform. That platform will manage the pooling mechanisms.
Okay. Okay.
That
So
is
when
what it
we are
means.
using locally database also we need that as a
Locally.
this data source needed for
See, if you're going for raw JDBC, right? If you're going for raw JDBC, then you don't need data source because you're going to manually manage the connection, right? What you do in the JDBC, you just recall the code that you do in the JDBC. You create a driver manager. Driver manager will be class.forName. In the
on
class.forName,
JDBC
you need to,
ODBC object.
yeah, JDBC, ODBC bridge driver, or else you need to provide the type 4 driver,
Yes.
and then you need to use driver manager.get connection, and there you need to feed in all the informations of the database, URL, username, password, and then the connection object have to be acquired, and with the connection object you will establish the statement, and which with the
Based on
statement
statement
you,
query running query we
yeah.
are
So
implementing.
that is not what we are doing here.
Okay.
Instead, and moreover, why JDBC template relies on data sources, that's the standard way to manage your connection object. Because we are not managing the connection object. JDBC template internally manages the connection object, means it needs an automated fashion of environment like data source environment. And that's the reason that we go for data source.
So we saved that all the properties in that application properties data source, and we injecting through this value, and we get through that data source.
Correct, correct. So application.properties is carrying all the database information.
Databases information.
Yeah. And that's injected
In
via
this
the at
username
value,
password
local
values, and
variable
data source getting that value.
created, and we offer those information into the data source object. And finally, you're returning the data source. This data source need to be binded with your
Template.
JDBC template. Yep. Any other question? Okay. So, okay. So let's go back to our MySQL platform. Okay, here I already have certain namespace created. For you people, I'll just create the schema once again. So you can see a schemas here, right? Once you launch your MySQL Workbench, you'll see a schemas tab, and you have a provision to create your schema from the IDE itself. Right click anywhere, okay? Right click anywhere in the white space, and you find a create schema option. Just click on the create schema. It will open the creating schema window, and there you can provide your name. So let's say I'm going to give it as American Express. So American Express is going to be the schema name, and here at the bottom, in the middle of the bottom, you can see the apply option. Just hit apply. This UI might vary slightly if you're working on top of Windows environment. Right now it's Mac, so that the UI might seems to be a little different, the visual of the UI, but almost the workflow is all same. Okay, so just hit apply, and there we go. We are done with creating an American Express schema. So what you have to do inside this American Express schema is you have to create a table. So right click, create table. You can also create a table from the application itself using JDBC template. Okay, so I'll be showing that as well. Or you can create the table manually here, or you can use a create table command to create it inside the query. This is the query editor. So you will have the option to create a query editor. So new query tab option will be there from the file menu. Hit the new query, it will keep opening the query tab. Always try to use the schema first. So what is the schema that we are going to use? Here is American Express. Hope the font is visible. So, and then placeholders are required. Okay, semicolon is essential. And then you can select. So what is the table that we are looking up? select star from customer. That's the model that we created. You can recall that, right? So you can select them and then hit the run option, and it will throw an error message because we don't have such table in the schema because we have newly created the schema, correct? So you can notice here in the bottom there's an error saying that sorry, that table doesn't exist. Okay, so once after we create the table, anyways, I'm going to create the table from the code. Okay, so before we get into that, I guess we go for a short break. We have already spent 1.5 hours. I need a little breathing space. So we'll take a short break for 10 minutes and then we'll come back and continue more forward. Uh, so meanwhile, if you have any questions also, you can make a note of it so that we'll discuss once we come back from the break. Hello. Please confirm, is that my voice is audible? Hello.
Yes, sir, it is audible.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So I guess this part is clear. If you have any questions, please let me know. Any question? Okay. So now let's move forward. Now let's go to, let's see if it's hitting the database properly, right? So that we have to check. So here we have done the configuration at component scan at import. So the import of DB config class is also there in place. So as you can see, it can import your at configuration classes. So that's what which we are trying to do here. So it's an array of class. You can see that. Okay. It's an array of class. So you can define an array representation here, and you can keep importing as many number of classes that you wanted by using comma. Okay. Any number of configuration classes can be imported. I don't think we need to do any configurations out here. Seems to be pretty okay. If you're very specific that you want to move out this, because this is only about the DB configuration, right? You can even move out this part there, but the problem is we need to define the binding have to be defined. Okay, the data source binding have to be defined through some name. So I'm making it little easier from making it too much of complicated things. So now let's go back to our app here where things comes in. The very first thing that we have to do is create an annotation config application context equals new annotation config application context, right? So then
American Express app config.
Come again.
American Express app config. We need to give inside the
App config. I'm not getting your point. What is that? Please reiterate it. Hello.
nothing, sir, nothing. Just read that class name.
So annotation config application context. Yeah. So that is the type of context that we are going to use right now because it's a Java based configuration, and feed in your American Express app config. If you have said that, yes, of course, that is what I'm going to do right now. American Express app config dot class. Okay. And then application context dot, what is that we are going to get? You can get the bean, which bean you want, the customer service, right? That's what this class is going to contact. So customer service class is what you need to acquire and define it as a customer service. Customer service equals this. So no typecasting required because I'm not going with the name of the bean. Instead, I'm going directly with the type. So get bean is two approach. One, you can call it with the name by using double quote string representation, or you can denote the type of the class. So you don't need to do the typecasting. Customer service is in place. Okay, so now I'm going to use a scanner class. Okay, I guess right now it's not required. Let's drop this off. I think I don't even need this customer service right now. So, but still, let's have this customer service dot create table. Actually, you are not supposed to do it via code. Okay, I'm trying to do the operation called DDL, right? DDL operation. What is DDL is? Data definition language. Literally, it means creation of a table, which we are not supposed to do, but still I'm doing it because we have the option to do that in JDBC template. Okay, create table, just a create table method, but we don't have that create table method. This should return a boolean, so I'm just capturing a boolean result, and if result, then you can say table created, else table not created. Okay, so just for our knowledge and information, I'm just applying this. Now let's go up to the customer service, and here we are supposed to use public boolean create table, right? To be more precise, we can even have a interface and we can implement them, but ideally I don't want to complicate this application too much. So let's keep it simple as possible. So create table method is there, and this create table method will be there again available in your DAO class, correct? Even in DAO, I'm going to have the same method, similar method. So what is it I've explained? Your service will contact DAO, right? That's how it is. So here where we are supposed to auto wire for a person called whom? JDBC template. We have already configured that, right? Correct? We've already configured that. So JDBC template. Now using the JDBC template dot, okay, execute method. There's an execute method. Inside this, you can say create table customer. Okay, since it's a string representation, I'm just giving a concatenation after this braces. Okay, create table customer. What is the first one? Customer underscore ID, right? Which is of an int, comma, customer underscore name. Instead of saying customer, let's make it a shortened cust. Okay, cust ID, just for a reference, because in many places we'll be using this. I don't want to use it lengthy. Cust ID, cust name is varchar of, let's say, 30 characters, and the next one is what? Customer address, right? Cust addr, which is of varchar of, let's say, 40. Okay, and then you can close it overall. So if you overall look at this code, I hope you can understand what the syntax is. Creation of a table, customer, cust ID is the column name, int, cust name is a column name, varchar type, cust address is a column name, varchar type of 40 characters. This is pretty simple, right? Not of too complication. So JDBC template. Now, if you look at this template execute method, this execute method actually, okay, if we go more deep into it, look at the execute method. So what this execute method throws?
It's required, sir. Concatenation.
Come again?
Concatenation is not required, I think.
It depends on the database that we are going to use. So it's always because this is a separation work. Okay, the curly brace, I'm sorry, the braces that we are using here is the representation of the SQL query separations. So what exactly happens is while we are using it in different databases, some database might understand this, some database might not. So I always have a practice of separating that. Even when we go for complex insert queries, I do have a separations. It's a good practice to follow that. Okay. Yeah, so what I was trying to explain here is if you look at this execute method is throwing an exception called data access exception. Correct? It throws a data access exception, but if you look at it, it's not ending up with any error. Means it's not forcing us to handle that exception. Correct? These are the type of interview question I usually ask. So the type of exception that all the JDBC follows is data access exception. I guess I've already given a detail about it. Okay. Data access exception. Correct? This data access exception is thrown by this method. But while you're calling this method, the compiler is not intimating us to handle it. It actually, we need to handle means we need to apply try and catch, right? So we have something called checked exception. And we have unchecked exception, correct? We have two types of exception categories. So one is checked, another one is unchecked exception. It looks like it falls under the unchecked exception. Checked meaning is the exception is checked and you have to apply the try and catch or you have to throw them. So what they say is Spring JDBC is not forcing the developer to handle the exception. They leave it to the developer side itself. If you want it, you want to do some debugging, you better handle it. Otherwise, I'm not forcing you. If everything is correctly defined, then it's going to execute properly. If everything is proper. So it's up to you, the developer, to handle the exception mechanisms, but I'm not forcing you. So it is not coming under the category of checked exception. It is coming under the category of unchecked exception. That's how it has been designed. This is a very important term to understand, but still, if you want to handle them, you better handle them so that the rest of the code won't get disturbed. We can handle it properly if in case you want to make it more professional. But it doesn't mean that it is unprofessional not to handle with try and catch, but it is very clearly mentioned by the Spring JDBC that it's optional. Data access exception. Okay. Exception. Exception trace. Is that clear? Okay. So now if you hover the cursor, this particular method doesn't return anything. Okay, the return type of the method is void. So what I'm going to do is Boolean. Okay, Boolean result flag equals false. So initially it's false. Return result flag. So when it will become true?
Query successful.
Yeah, result underscore flag equals true. Clear? Self-explanatory, not too much complex here. So now this method is what we are invoking. We have to invoke from the customer service. But how the customer service will contact the customer DAO? How this customer service?
Create object.
Yeah, create the object of whom? Customer DAO. But if you create the object manually, then there is no purpose of using Spring Framework, right? So here again we can apply what? At auto wired and refer your customer DAO. Will it automatically inject? Yes, because customer DAO is what being? Spring being managed by IOC. Correct? See how we are synchronizing the learnings that we had so far. So at auto wired customer DAO class, customer DAO, and down here return customer DAO dot create table. Right? Done. Now coming back to the app class, we get a result. If the result is this, it's going to do this. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know. A very simple logic. So the method that we are going to use for applying the DDL, please make a note of it. The method that we are trying to use to perform the DDL operation is execute method. This execute method is used for performing DDL operation. Like which there are multiple methods. For DML we have, for DQL we have data query language, data manipulation language, data definition language. So for all languages we have, if you go for DML, you'll be using update method. If you go for DQL, you have query method, query for object. Okay, there are multiple method types are there, but we'll see predominantly which we will be using. So who is the tool that we are using in order to communicate with our backend database? Is JDBC template. Yeah, this is following what design pattern? Template design pattern, which is helping us to reduce your maximum lines of code other than the configuration. Configuration is always we have to do. If you still want to reduce the configuration part of whatever we have done so far in the DB config, then you better go for the next modernized tool called Spring Boot. A Spring Boot will automatically eliminate all the steps whatever we have done so far. And you will get the JDBC template in just a matter of time. In just a matter of time, you will get JDBC template. Just you need to offer the property details. Application.properties, you need to offer the details. And that's it. Rest is assured that you will be able to get the object in hand. Is that clear? Okay. So now here we are done with this create table mechanisms. Let's see if it's getting wired to the database perfectly and is the table getting created. That we have to testify, right? So to testify, first let's go back to the backend MySQL database and see if we are having the table in place. So right now we don't have any table, as we already noticed that we don't have any table. If I refresh, the table in the schema is right now empty. Okay, if everything goes well, if my configurations is all in place, correctly done, then obviously the things will be in place. Otherwise, we'll be notified with the type of error. Let's see. Let's wait and see. Good. So that is an exception. Perfect. It's good to learn that. So what is the exception here is we have given a schema name, right? What is the schema name that we have created? American
Bank.
Express.
American Express.
American Bank.
But what is the schema name that we have mentioned in the property file? Dummy
No
schema name,
schema
right?
name. Yeah.
So that's the problem. So looking at the exception itself, you should try to derive with the problem, the root cause. Okay, don't spend much time. If the exception is going to be some 2000 exceptions, then probably it's quite difficult. But these exceptions, just by looking at the head of, okay, hey, unknown database, schema name, there's no database called schema name. Pretty good. We have done a mistake out there. It's not an intentional mistake, but it's good to have that mistake in place. So what's the understanding is you have to give the correct schema name out here. The schema name is American Express. So let's recall the name if it's spelled correctly. American Express. Yup, it's correct. Now let's go ahead and hit the run button and see what's the next line of exceptions is there in the kitty. Cool. No more exception. So then we are going to learn less. As we get more exceptions, we learn a lot. Okay. So try to embrace exceptions in your life, in your development life. As you face more exceptions is where you get a chance to learn more. If your exceptions are eliminated maximum, then your learning curve is reduced actually. But voluntarily you cannot make mistakes, but try to embrace when you're having a lot of exceptions. That's where your experience is. That's where you're gaining your experience actually. Okay. Try to welcome a lot of exceptions in your development time so that you get a space to learn a lot. So let's see if the table got created. Just look at the wizard, UI wizard, and just do a refresh. There is a drill down option and it confirms that we have created a table successfully. We'll also check out here. That's awesome. We have the table in place. It looks the same column that we have defined there in the query, cust ID, cust name, and cust address. It works fine. So our table got created successfully with the help of the JDBC template tool. All our configurations, all our import options of the dbconfig configuration file, everything is in place. If I have not done the import of the dbconfig here, then your configurations would have not been brought into the limelight, and this successful operation would have not happened. So I have splitted the configuration. Even though the American Express app config is right now empty, let it be empty. That doesn't matter. But still, it's better to have a categorical way of defining your configurations rather than dumping all the configurations into a single class. Is that clear? Any questions?
Sir,
Yes, please.
so far we have created the table. If I want to insert the data into it using DML, so I have to perform like other than execute, there will be some inbuilt method for doing the
Exactly.
DML operation, right?
Of
Okay.
course, yes. So that's what we are going to learn that one by one. The next process is
Okay.
we need to insert the record in, right? So right now we have successfully created the table. This is to testify if that code, what we have assembled now and configured is all working fine intact. Yes, of course it's working fine intact. That's the confirmation that we got right now. Now we can keep meddling with this template to do further operations of DQL, or it can be a DML, anything, that's fine. We can keep proceeding with that. Do anyone have any other question? Okay, I guess we are running out of time. We have another 1 hour in pocket. So let's jump straight into the DML operation. Let's not go for the DQL. Let's do a DML operation. So for that, the first thing that we have to keep in mind is going to the app. Let's make it a little input variant of application. Okay, so this is not required anymore, right? Let's comment this, and even these codes are not required. Source. Okay. Why is that the comment is not placed? Okay. So now the next step is I'm going to make it a little interactive. So I'm going to use a scanner class. You know what scanner class is meant for? Java.util.
Runtime value.
Yeah. Scanner equals new scanner of system.in scanner dot. So typically we are going to find, we are going to get the input. So let's declare some variables. Int cust ID shortly. Next int string cust name scanner dot next string or next method. Then cust address so we have I guess we have given all the input variants. Okay, let it be aside. We'll keep this aside from the application side. We'll just keep this aside. We'll go straight into the customer service. Okay. See to that, I'm going to use multiple methods. Okay. Public Boolean create customer. Okay. So it's a create customer or create customers. So let's have it as list of customer named as customers. Okay. Then you'll use this down here. And you will call this as DAO dot create customers forwarding this customers list. So customers list is going to carry a list of whose object? Customer object. That is what it means. Correct? So first let's keep all things ready. Okay, this is like recipe. We are preparing all the recipes and finally we'll start cooking. So I'm going to show you 4 major operations. 4 or 5, I guess. Create customers. Okay. Update customer, not customers. So I don't need a list out here. Instead, it's just going to carry a customer. Okay. Right. So create customer. Instead of create, it's update. And then delete customer. Okay. Delete customer. So in the delete customer, we are going to have the customer ID. That's sufficient, right, to delete it. Customer ID. And same delete customer here and forward this customer ID variable. Customer ID. Create, update, delete. Insert, update, delete. That's your DML. And we have DQL, right? Get all.
Select query, sir.
Yeah, that's what. Find or get. Find all customers and this is going to carry no parameter, but it's just going to return the all customers that's been found from the database. Technically, this is not required. Find customer by name. Okay, so find customer by name is another method which is very specific to finding the customers based on the customer name. Okay, let's keep the customer name unique and drop in this method here while you're calling it and forward this customer name. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. This is just we are creating the recipes. It looks like creating the recipes and keeping it ready. So we have all these methods: create customers, update customer, delete customer, find all customers, find customer by name. So we already performed the DDL, okay, and now we are performing the DML, and we are also going to perform the DQL. So we'll do this one by one. Now, why these errors are popped up? Why these errors are popping up? That's because we don't have such methods in the customer DAO class. Yeah, so there we got to do those methods. So I don't want to create them again. So let's just create this in the customer DAO. Just hit this. It'll create the method safely out there. And this one also to be created. And this one also to be created. Delete customer. And finally, find all customers and find by customer name. Bingo, we are done it. We are done with it. So just save all. So the errors are eliminated. So you can see all errors are gone. So we have those methods in place. So let's go back. Okay, so these are auto-generated. I don't want these comments. So step by step, we will do this. Okay, not in a hurry. We just try to complete this slowly. Step by step process. Here, the first step is create customers. List of customer we have, right? So we need to iterate the customers and then we need to insert the record. So how are we going to perform the insertion of the record? We'll see that shortly. Now we need to cook up those records first. So going back to the app. So if you look at the MySQL backend database, I don't have the the records in the table. The table is empty, right? So now only we are going to insert some records. So okay, it has to be in a repeated manner, right? Even scanner have to be questioned. Let's make this sysout, enter customer ID. Customer name and customer address. Right. So temporarily, I'm going to put them in a do and while. Just a prompt. This is a constraint, right? So we have to do a multiple iterations here. So we need a collections also, right? So will this mechanism will work? Let's first create a list and then we'll decide. List of customer. New array list. This customer we have to import. So let's keep this continue outside. Continue. Right. So you keep continuing if you provide the continue as yes. And so once this is done, before continuing, you have to perform an operation of customers dot add of customer equals new customer of, and forward the cust ID, cust name, and cust address. This is how we create an now you can notice that we are managing the customer object manually, right? Because it's a Java bean. It's not a Spring managed, and we use the argumented constructor to pass the value of those customer ID. It's more convenient rather than using customer.set cust ID, set cust name, set cust address. We can reduce the lines of code by just dropping all the values into the argument of the constructor at the time of creation of the object. Now you can add them one by one. Okay, so seems to be the code is reasonable to understand, not too complex. Or to be more precise, by mistake the user enters yes. Okay, sorry. Right. We are meddling with multiple languages, right? So sometimes we don't know what exact keywords to be used. Sometimes we tend to forget. So I work suddenly on TypeScript. I work suddenly on Python. So different languages. So many things are running in mind. Okay, so this is what it is. I hope this application should work fine. So what we do is we'll just do multiple times and see if the data is working fine first. So we have the list customers dot for each system println. Okay, this is a style of lambda expressions. Okay, don't get too panicked. This can be iterated through a traditional for each, but right now I'm just using a for each method of the list and using a method referencing operation. This is called as a method referencing operator to enable the lambda expression syntax, and it's more one-liner of statement. Now, if I'm going to execute this, let's see if other methods are blocked. Okay, so let's format this a little better for readability. And here we go. Run Java application. On the console, as a stand happens, prompting for customer ID 101 Sabari Chennai. Do you want to continue? Yes. So condition is wrong. No, that's because of next line. I'm not connecting to the database, okay? This is only a testing that's happening right now. So let's see if why is that? This is for next, okay? So it's prompting. So what a big blunder I've done, right? Instead of you applying the equals method, I've just used double equal to. That's fine. Internally it checks for the reference, so equals method checks for the value of the string. We have to always keep our brain active, otherwise this happens. Okay, so do I want to enter the next one? Yes, of course. 102 Balaji from Bengaluru. And yes, again, this time small s, but still it's accepting 103. And customer name is Pathasaradi. And address, let's say Mumbai. Do you want to continue? Nope. Pretty cool. So you can see all the list of values being printed. It's iterating, right? For each is iterating and the object is printed. The customers list, which is carrying the list of 3 objects, customer objects, are getting printed. You can notice that how the values are printed, how this is reasonably printed. It's because I insisted or highlighted at the time of creating the customer model class that I punched in a toString method. You can see the template, right? This is the template that's been used here to print it out. Okay, this internally bounded to it. So it's always good to have this toString to do these kind of a testing. So if you have any questions on this logic, please let me know. I want to make it a little interactive. So that's why I spend a little bit of time over here. Probably many people might know about this logic, but still if you're new, then you try to follow this principle. Yeah. Any questions, please do let me know.
So for this lambda expression, is it related to Java 8 or?
Yeah, of course it is related to Java 8. Starting from Java 8, you can notice that I'm already in Java 14. So Java 14 in turn accepts Java 8 features, right? Thoroughly. Java 8 features are very predominantly changed features compared to any other version so far. The very last version that had a bigger change was on Java 5. Okay. Like diamond operators, many features Java 5 brought in. Okay, for each loop was there in Java 5.
Generic.
String args. Okay, string args. You can have multiple parameters into your methods. Instead of having multiple parameters, you can give 3 dotted signs. After
And
which,
passing
the
the method
biggest
also
change.
is there. Sir.
Yes.
Even we can pass the methods also in conditions,
Yeah,
right?
that is what we bring in into the lambdas also. So anonymous methods is what lambda expressions are pointed out in here. So like how we have an anonymous class, the same way we have anonymous methods, and it's helping us to define all the lambda scopes. So functional interfaces, we embrace the functional interfaces features here. Okay, that's another topic. Probably if we find time, I'll come up with a course on the Java 8 exclusively, which is essentially required in any interview you go for. That requires minimum of 2 weeks of course, I guess. So probably 12 hours to 14 hours is sufficient to thoroughly understand the Java 8 in and out. Okay, so we have streams in Java 8. We have streams API. Okay, so that is also quite interesting. Okay, I guess I don't want to use this testing anymore. Let's jump straight into handing over this data. So to hand over this data, we already have the object in place, the customer service. The customer service is going to invoke the create customers and forward the list. Okay. I believe others are also following up with me. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Don't worry about these things. If you're not aware of lambdas, Java 8, not at all a problem here. Okay. To not spend much time, I just went on to test this through lambda expressions. If you're thoroughly not aware of lambda expressions, please don't get distracted. Just it's a normal for each loop mechanisms that we follow. So customer service dot create customers and forward the customers object. And that's it. And now shifting to customer service class, and there we are going to have the call to the customer DAO create customers, and in turn shifting to the customer DAO, and here where we need to write the logic. So what is the logic that we are going to write? The very first thing is make use of the JDBC template tool. Very first thing is we have to make use of this JDBC template tool. JDBC template dot, you have to call a method called update method. Okay, we also have batch update. We have a discussion on batch update probably tomorrow or the next week. We'll try to have it. I'll try to see when it is possible. So we do have prepared statement calls. I also have a demo for that. We'll also see how to call procedures and so on. So here it's all about the update. Okay, but this time it's going to be update with arguments. Okay, that's something very important. So we have polymorphic method of update. Okay, update method is overloaded here, you can see. So I'm going to grab this one. Okay, a couple of parameterized update method of the JDBC template. And the very first thing that I'm going to enforce here is the insert. Okay, it's not inert, it's insert into customer, insert into table name and the values. What are the values we need to punch in? Customer ID, customer name, and customer address. So what is this 3 dots referring to? Placeholders, or we more precisely call them as what? Query strings, correct? Placeholders. So dynamic values are going to be injected, right? Instead of giving it inside the string, we are going to give it dynamically there. I guess I've given a single quotes. Oh, no, it's double quotes. Okay. Now, what is this? Okay, that's because of a null value. Okay. Now, here I'm going to create an object array, new object array. Okay, new object array, and we are going to pass on the values into it. For whom we are going to pass on the values? For these 3 question marks. Because it's going to be iterated, I'm going to iterate this and I'm going to pass the value one by one. So what we do here is we'll just use the traditional for each this time. Okay, for loop customer colon customers, right? So we'll just use customers list, and it's going to iterate one by one of the customer object is going to be popped out. And once you pop out the customer object, you use the customer object here to fetch the first thing called get customer ID, then comma customer dot, I'm sorry, customer dot, customer dot get customer name, and the third one is customer dot get address. You can notice that why am I using this new object array? Okay, the parameter that we are going to pass here is going to be moved through an object array only. Okay, because we don't know what type is this. This is a customer, this can be an employee or anything. That doesn't matter for me. I want to capture these values ID, name and address to be carried in some array of object. Okay, new object array, and feed in the value. So 3 values are stored in this array. So one by one internally the update method will read through this definition, get the customer ID and punch it here. Generally what we will do is we will use prepared statement, correct? You can recall the prepared statement PS, and then prepared statement dot set int, and then you will be using the first question mark, and then you will be giving the value, and like which you have to do it for 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, how many ever placeholders you have, set string, and then the second question mark, and then you have to provide the value. But now it's a little bit of simplified, right? I don't want to go for this traditional JDBC logic anymore. Instead, I'm just going to use the JDBC template flow. Okay, so that's what is happening. So first thing is you need to provide the query, and second one is the arguments that you want to pass it to the placeholder. Okay, so that's what we are doing, a new object array with the specific values. And every time when the loop is running, it's like 3 customers or 4 customers, the 4 customers value will get inserted. If you look at the update method return is int. How many number of rows got updated? Okay, so you can say int, you can put it outside, int rows count. Okay, every time it's going to be a row count. Okay, so finally once that is done, then we can sys out for our reference and say total rows inserted plus the rows count, and if rows count is greater than 0, then you return true. Okay, else not, you return false. As simple as that. Is that clear? Are you able to understand? Are you able to follow up this snippet of code? If you have any questions on this, please let me know. It's all a piece of logic that we apply here. That's all. Nothing too complex. It's a local variable, so I initialize with the default value of 0. Yeah, any questions, please?
So usually in the traditional for loop, we will be having three things by separating the colon.
So
it represents like it is related to for each, right?
yeah, this is for each. I already told you, right? Who's this? Okay. See, yeah, this is for each. This is for each loop. For iterating your collections. Correct?
Okay, sir.
Yeah, yes, indeed, it's a for each loop only. This is a for each loop, but we don't use for each term like unlike in other languages we have term like for each. We don't have such things. In for loop, the template looks like this. You have the collections list and the list with colon. Okay, from the list, what is going to be popped out? Customer object one by one, and it's going to be stored in that customer variable, reference variable. That is what it means. And it should be of generic type. Only generic type of collections you are eligible to use the for each loop. And that's what I've used. Diamond operator is used here, right? Customer. This is your generics, which got introduced in Java 5, which I was talking about earlier. Yeah, any other question? You can still use a traditional for loop, initialization, condition, and reinitializations based on the count of the customers, and then you can do it. But why do we need to complex them? We have a simplified version of a for each. Yeah, do anyone have any other question? If you ask questions so that I will get some space for breathing. Otherwise, I will not get. That's why I'm keep on asking for more questions.
This object array is also very new.
This one.
Yes, sir.
This one.
Yes, sir. Object array,
This
new object.
this is not new. This is there for ages. And they brought the object and they brought the array concepts. This is how you create an array. Object, array of object, right? Using new anything. It can be new array, new customer, and then put the array square bracket. That's it, you're done. And it depends on how many customer object that you're going to define here. Okay, but why I'm keeping object? Anything you can place here. What alone you can place in this array?
Customer array.
Exactly, only customer. But here anything, because any class, topmost class dependency is object in Java. Yeah, so that's what it means. So that's why I'm throwing int. Actually, it is not int in this case, since it's an object representation. Even though guest customer ID is a primitive of int, it's getting internally converted to a wrapper class of integer. Before, while we feed in as a looks like a primitive, right? But actually we have captured in an object, so it's in turn getting converted to an integer. And ideally the other two are string representation. Yeah. Any other question? No questions? Okay. Let's see if this works fine. Let's this time from the app we are calling the customers. Okay, so let's rerun this application. Before that, let us do one more thing. It's always good to have a try and catch, correct? So let's have try.
Sir, that customer name function name is error, sir. Customer type.
That's fine. Otherwise,
problem.
it would have thrown an error. I guess I've made a mistake from the customer.
Yes.
So here we need to change. So this changes everywhere. Okay, I'm not touching right now. It's a spelling mistake there. Yeah. I'll try to do it before I send the code to you on the GitHub. What is the exception? Data access exception. So you rhymingly keep repeating this again and again, then only you'll be able to recall these names. Otherwise, you'll forget things. So the type of exception that SQL Spring JDBC offers is data access exception. Okay. So now let's go ahead and run this. Sorry. That's exception dot print stack trace. Then there's no point in handling the exception. We want to know what the exception is. Okay. I guess things are fine. Please be noted that the tables are empty. Right now we don't have anything in the table. Absolutely, it's empty. Customer ID 101 or let's say 1001. Sabari. Address Chennai. Do you want to continue? Yes. 1002. Sundar Pichai. Say Washington. Do you want to continue? Yes. It's 1003. And Steve Jobs. Addresses New Jersey. Do you want to continue? No. And now only it's hitting the database. Total rows inserted is what? 3. Let's confirm that. Boom. There we go. All the 3 records are inserted perfectly. Right? Not even a single exceptions that we have faced. Everything seems to be pretty good if everything is aligned well. Okay. So this is how we do an insert operation by using the update method. Update method takes 2 parameters. One is the query by itself. The second one is the parameter that you want to pass here. What if in case I'm not interested to pass the parameter like this? I want to use it here itself. Well, let me go ahead and split it with the, that's why we use the placeholders. Okay. In order to separate, we can do that as well. Because even that you have an update method with the string alone without the second parameter. Okay. That way also it is possible. You can directly give the values here. But I want to make it a little dynamic, right? The application need to be a little more of dynamic. So that's the reason that I go with this way of second parameter approach of array of object. Is that clear? So total rows are counted and it says 3 and I guess we are written with true that I didn't check here. So it should be a Boolean result, right? Sys out result. Let's insert one more 1004 and see what's the result is. So 1004 customer name is going to be, let's say, Balaji from Pune. No, sorry. Total row inserted is 1 and the return is true. Okay, so let's go back and see if that record is captured. Yes, indeed, the record is captured. Pretty good. Seems things are going well. So same way, what we have to do now? We have to do the other operations. Update operation, delete operation. The method is same, update only. but finding is something little complex. Finding all customers, find customer by name, right? This is a place where DQL occurs, data query language. So this need to be added on with something called row mapper. Row mapper is more similar like a result set that we use in JDBC, correct? In many interviews, if you go for on the Spring, sure they'll be asking about the row mappers, and there are a variety of row mappers are also there. But I'll take you through a tour of row mappers alone. You can have more further researching and see what other different variants of row mappers that we have. So ideally speaking, this part will be little seems to be a little complex, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible, and I'll try to deliver it at the best to make you people understand clearly. But try to recall always this: the result set way of operation is what is going to be done via the row mappers in this finding operations. Update and delete is going to be pretty simple, not of too complex operation. Same way like how we did the insert operation, the same way we are going to do for update. Okay, the method name is same, update only. Instead of insert query, what we are going to use is update customer, set whatever the column and where condition, delete customer, where the condition, but the method name of the JDBC template is going to be the same, update. And the object array might vary depending on the value that you're going to feed in for update and delete. That's all. For update, it's customer object again. And for delete customer, it's customer ID. From the customer, you will get the customer ID to set the value. Okay, you want to change the address of the customer. Okay, then what you are going to do? So we'll see that right now, so that this part can be completed. Tomorrow we'll see directly on the find. Okay. So if you have any questions before that, please let me know so that I'll take you to the tour of update and delete shortly. We still have another 10 more minutes. So we'll try to complete that. Any questions? Are you able to follow up whatever I've done so far in the last 2.5 hours of time? Or is that blunt? Nothing is there to be understandable. How is it? Because only then I get more confirmation that, okay, you people are getting things clearly. This area you need not complex yourself. It's only creating array of object. You can create a separate array of object. Like traditionally how you create an array, you create it object array, object class array, and feed in all the values 0, 1, and 2, and then call that object here. But I'm doing it everything on the go, on the fly.
Sir,
What is written? That's the
suppose
only
this
difference.
object array will confuse means that question mark place we can directly put plus customer dot
Yes,
customer ID.
yeah, you can, yes, but that that seems to
Dynamically
be not a better practice.
Okay.
That's not the best practice. Okay, then there is no point in going for JDBC template and using the placeholder concepts. Why you go for prepared statement? You can do it in statement also. Why we need to go for prepared statement is to avoid the challenges of manually feeding those separations. Okay, this is nothing to confuse here. It's pretty simple. It's just an array of value. I'll also give you, okay, let me not hurry this. Not a problem. So please make a note of it. What exactly happens is it's an array. Okay, assume like this is an array, right? So here what I've kept 1001, correct? Second one is what? The name Sabari I've given. Third one is what? The address Chennai, correct? This is what this is the whole thing that is stored in a customer object, correct? And from the customer object I'm getting the ID, the name, and the address, and I'm storing in this object array. Okay, I'm storing in this object array. So if you look at the size of this object array, it's typically going to be 3, 0, 1, and 2. So this particular thing is going to be one object, and this is one object. Why I'm using object? Why can't you use something else over here? Of course you can't, because it's a generic purpose. The operations that JDBC template is going to do it for generic purpose, so it can be any type. Okay, I'm sorry, not a generic purpose. It's of any type of operations that this update can do for any value of that you want to feed in here. It can be a float value, it can be a date value, right? So which one is best is to use the common operation of object array and feed in whatever value you wanted. So internally an array will be created, and the array will have the value of 1001, the name, and the address. What this JDBC template update method internally will do is pick this value, okay, pick this 1001 and assign it to the first placeholder. Pick this subarray and assign it to the second placeholder, and pick this Chennai value and assign it to the third placeholder. You're getting it? But why is that we create an array? Because to array is to hold these values, right? Somewhere you need to, it's a container. Array is a container holding all the values. And you can create n number of values in the container. That's why I'm not specifying the size. Size is empty, means it can grow as per the value that you define. If it's a 3, it becomes 3 array. If it's a 6 you give, it becomes 6 indexed array. Okay, so that's how it is. Not too complex, it's pretty simple. So the second parameter, if you look at the update method, the second parameter of this update method is an object arguments. Okay, you can see that you have object arguments. That's what I'm representing it with an object array. You're getting it? So that is technically for applying the placeholders. So you're creating an object array. It can be represented as object array or it's an args, object args. Doesn't matter. Any number of objects that you can forward. So that's how we manipulate this. Okay. Any other question? Okay, I guess I don't want to dump you more with the update and delete. We'll take it up tomorrow. Probably it will not take more than 10 minutes. The first 10 minutes to 15 minutes will complete this. And then we'll move forward to the find. And the next important topic that we have to discuss is the transaction management. JDBC transaction handling. Declarative transaction, programmatic transaction is going to be little complex, but quite interesting topic, energetic topic, and very essential topic. Any interviews you go for, they will be posting some questions on the transaction handling mechanisms from the JDBC template as well. So that's why I'm going more in depth to it. And also we'll be seeing a batch update and how to call up procedures. Okay, that also we will be seeing as a demo. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to take. We still have another 6 more minutes as per the time that's reflecting on my mission.
Sir, I
Yes.
follow your code, getting no such bean definition exception. Can I share my screen and show the error? I couldn't resolve that error.
Yeah, we'll do that. If anyone else have any other question on the code, please let me know before I take that question. Anything that I would like you would like me to explain, please let me know. You have to thoroughly go through this code step by step, personally, spend some time, detailed, go line by line. Don't go on a hurry-burry scanning. It won't work. Okay, starting from where I started, you have to notice that everything just started by creating the specific classes. And then I went straight into the pom.xml and added all the relevant dependencies. Step-by-step procedure. The recordings will be shared. Go through the recordings again. If in case you have a little bit of uh, uneasiness you found in understanding, please go through the recordings again. See how I have started the flow. Now it looks like a full, complete, blown version of a project which has everything in it internally. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'm done with it. Let's see if you want to spend some time to address this query, you can. Otherwise, you can wind up. Anyways, this is going to be recorded. Yeah, who's that who wants to share? Please do share your screen. Let disconnect.
Are you able to see my screen?
Oh, I'm not. Yeah, I am. Yes, please.
When I run, I end up with the no such bean definition exception.
That's because customer service is not identified. Go to the customer service class. No qualifying bean. Good. Okay. Customer service available. No qualifying bean. Customer service available. At service. Okay. At auto wired. Go to your configuration. Okay. Go to your application app.java. No. Go to the configuration. There itself the products.
Yes, sir. Here the
com.ba. It's
here
not
the
BA.
package name.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
PA. It's BA. Yeah. Run the application.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's it. So anyone have any other question? Or you're all good to go? Okay then. So thank you so much. Have a great day and have a great night. And we'll catch up tomorrow evening. Stay safe. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.